Hello and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be building out our view class. Now, before that, let me point out some mistakes I made so that way we can correct them. So I did a little bit of testing just to make sure that my code was actually working. And so I built out a controller and I realized that there were a few errors. So the first error is that under this get controller function, I actually had this pointed to the wrong place because this is what your code shows, but what it should actually have a directory separator between the controllers here because we have a folder and then the actual controller. So it should point to the controllers, then that controller's folder, and then the controller file. The second issue is that when we create a controller, we are instantiating this controller in action, like so. Well, whenever we created the router here, I forgot to actually instantiate that. So if you go to the get controller function and you just add the little parentheses and you call the $controller and $action. And then we need to do the same thing when we instantiate it here as well. That's going to be $controller, $action. So now that that's done, I'm just going to go ahead and delete these two. Okay, so now that that's been instantiated, we are finished with this router. I do apologize, I did make that mistake, but now we're going to create a view controller, or a view, basically we're going to create a view class. Oh, another thing that I did mess up on is when I created this application class, I forgot to put the application.core.php. So you might have forgotten that as well. Just make sure that you rename that to application.core.php. Otherwise, you'll get an error saying that the application class doesn't exist. Okay, so I'm creating a new file, and this is going to be view.core.php. And essentially we're just going to create, now this is actually going to have a lot of protected variables, so we'll go and do this one by one. But first, let's open up PHP. Okay, so I'm going to create class view, and this is going to have a protected $_head. Just going to leave that lowercase, a body, and a foot. And then I'm going to create a site title, an output buffer, and a layout. And we can actually set this layout, but we don't need to set it right now. We'll do $_page. Let's see. And do page name. Yeah, we'll do page name. And a payload. Okay, so now we're going to need to construct this. So I'm just going to add a semicolon here, and I'm going to do public function __ construct. So when this is constructed, we're just going to simply say if $this _page name is equal to null, then we're going to say that $this _page name is equal to, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a config, so config, and we're going to get, and we're going to just say that we're going to get app.name. And so I'm going to go to the config here, in the developer config. I'm going to Yeah, I'll put this in developer config. I'll just do config set and then app.name, and we'll say that this is CMS MVC. Okay, so if we go back to the view, app.name, just double check that. So essentially this will create the app.name, which we can actually create a setter later for this page name if we want to change that. But the idea is for this title to get the page name and then the page title later. Okay, so now we need to create a render function. So I'm going to create a public function. I'm going to call this render. And this is going to take in $view name, a view, and the payload. And I'm going to set that equal to just the default like an empty string, and then I'm also going to say that $use layout is true. So we'll use this layout later, but first we're going to say that if the file underscore exists, and we're going to check this VIE dot $view name dot ds dot $view dot and then dot view dot php. So if that file exists, we're then going to set the payload. So $this underscore payload is equal to payload. And we're gonna not use those just yet. File underscore x. Okay. So now we're going to require. So require once, and then just require that. And let me just double check to make sure. So view name slash view .php. Perfect. So if $use layout is set to true, we're going to first check to see if it's empty, and then $this layout, then we're going to get app.layout. So we actually need to create this app.layout. And you know what? We're not even going to do this. We're going to use a setter. So we're just going to say $this set layout, and this will set the layout for us. We'll set this setter later in the video. So if that does in fact do that, we're also going to say if file underscore exists, and we're going to check for this layout, which is, I think we did lay. Just let me double check that real quick. Yep, lay. Okay. So back to this view. So if the file exists, layout, $this underscore layout, and then we're gonna check for this dot layout dot php. So if that exists, we're just simply gonna require it. Else, we're going to kill the application, the view, and then we'll say $. I'm sorry, not view. Sorry, $, the layout, $this underscore layout does not exist. Now, we also are using an if statement for the view itself. So we're going to say else, and then we're going to kill the application saying the view doesn't exist. Okay. View name. View of like that. Give it more of a friendly error. Okay. So the next one, this is going to be a little bit more confusing, and basically we're going to create a content switcher. I guess the easiest way is to start with the start function. So we're going to create a function called public function start, and this is going to take in a type, so $type. And actually, all this code that I'm about to write for this output buffering is actually written by Curtis. I mentioned him, I think, in the previous episode or the one before that. All this code comes from him, or at least what I didn't modify did. Okay, so we're going to say that ob underscore start, and then we're also going to say that this underscore output buffer is equal to the type. Okay, so all we're doing is we're starting output buffering, and then we're setting the output buffer to a specific type. So now that it's actually started, we can create a content or a content function, which will lay out our content. So public function and then content is equal to type. And we're just going to switch on the type. So we're going to create a couple of cases, which is going to be head, body, and foot. And all we're going to do is just use the setter. So we're going to return the head, return the body, and return the foot. And then in our default, we're just going to return false, break the application, break out of the loop. Switch statement, sorry. Okay. Well, it's not going to be able to explain, I guess, explain the break, but that's fine. Okay. So now that we have the content function, we also need to end. So we're going to create a function called end. And all it's going to do is it's going to switch on the output buffer. So switch this and then score output buffer. So it's going to switch on that, and then it's just going to change based on the head, body, and foot, such as that. And then it's actually going to clean that. And then it will just return false on the default. Okay. Now, this is probably a little confusing on like exactly what this does, but essentially this will allow us to create a layout where we can create content between a head, a body, and footer content, and then call that inside the layout. So if we call this start function and we say body, and then we grab the content for the body, that will appear on the layout, so that way we don't have to use like input or not input, sorry, include or require or anything like that. Okay, so now we're just going to create a bunch of getters and setters. So public function site title. So this is just a getter. Site title, turn this, and then underscore, and then site title. And then public function set site title, title. The site title is equal to title. And then we'll do public function set layout, and then we'll take a default layout, and this layout is equal to layout. And in fact, what I can do is I can do one big and then get, just do layout dot default. So call it, and then if we change it, then we can change it here, and that will be our setter. Let's just go to the dev config and say that set, and then we'll do layout dot default, and we'll just say default. So if we go to our views and layouts, and we can create a new file called default layout. It should be under layouts, and then I'm just going to create a new folder for our home, and this will be our home view, and then this will be layout, just so that way we can organize some of this. And go back to the view, and let's see. So we have that page name. So public function, and we'll do page name, and all it will do is return that page name, and then public function set page name. This will take in $name, and then we'll just say this page name is equal to name, and then we'll do public function get payload, and then we'll just return this underscore payload. So when we call the view, we do this payload, and then we can use layout. I think they use layout. So if you use layout, then and if empty, then we'll set this layout. Then this layout. So by default, then we can do $use layout, so we can actually set the layout, because in the set layout function, by default it's that, but you can actually pass the layout. So when we call view and then we do the render, we can pass this use layout, and we can actually set, so by default it's just set to true. Use layout, so it's always going to be true unless I set it to false, and it's always going to like use the layout. How is, okay, say that $layout, pass that through, and we'll actually just set this equal to default, and then we'll do $this score layout is equal to layout. So if it's empty, then we'll use this default layout, but you can actually define. So then when we call the layout, it actually won't matter. Set layout, this doesn't matter because now we don't actually have to use the set layout function. Then we can go here, and we don't actually have to do that because it automatically does that for us. So if we go back to our controller here, you'll see I've actually commented this out, but now I can do that. So if I leave this empty, this new view, then it should do it like that. And then we'll just do $ view or layout, and we'll set that to default, and then pass $layout through there, like so. And then now we don't even have to set a default in this view for the layout, because there will always be a layout. And so anytime that we call a controller, we'll call that view, and then if we pass a layout through there, it will pass through there. But if we don't, it will be default. So when we do this controller here, by default, it'll pass the layout default, unless we specifically change it, because the only thing that's actually required is this controller in action. So if we go to our controllers, we do new folder. Let's say we do home. We do a new folder, not a new file. We do roller dot say home dot php, and then we do open up our PHP tag, and then do class roller, and this extends roller, and we change this controller here to home actually, and then we do public function underscore construct. We don't actually have to. Actually, I think we have to pass it function, but we don't have to pass it view. And then here we can do the same for the parent. By default, the view automatically gets passed in, but if we want to change the view to, like, let's say an admin view instead of default, we can do admin or home or whatever, and that will pass that through. And then we also need the index action, so public function index, and then action, and then we'll call this home view, and then render, and then we'll do the home folder for our view index, which we'll call the index view. And then let's see what else. We have this payload that we can pass through, but we're not going to pass a payload through right now. And then we can also use the layout. We can change that to false, and it won't actually load the view itself. Okay. So let me just go back to this home controller. And so we created the home view, and now if I create an index.view.php, I do an h1 hello home page, save that. As you see, we have this hello from homepage, and that's exactly what we want. But if you look in our inspect element inside our body, it renders several divs, and then after all the divs, it renders this hello. We don't want that because it creates an issue, such as, let's say we go to our default, sorry, layouts, default layout, and we do an h1 hello from default layout. And then let's create a div. We want to put our body content here. Well, As you see, it renders our homepage stuff first, and then and then the body content. Well, we created that output buffer thing earlier, so we can open up our PHP tags, and then we can echo, and then do $sign this, and we can do content, body, and our PHP tags. So this will now echo our body content. Now, if you load, nothing's here, right? We want this homepage to end up under this default layout. So if we go back to our home view and we just Control X and we open up our PHP and say $sign this, and then start body, and then PHP $sign this in, and remember, we don't need body. In fact, we don't need to pass anything through this end function. And we paste this hello from page. In theory, it should work. And as you can see, this is now inside that div that we created. And that's exactly what we want. So now we can create any layout we want. So let's go back to our controller here. What if we pass an admin? We would expect that this would kill the application. And as you can see, the layout admin does not exist. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now, let's say that we want to look inside an admin folder or the admin view folder. So we save that, and you see the view admin with I guess that should be view name, but view admin with the view of index does not exist. That's that user-friendly error that we wanted. Now later on, we can actually go through and add a 404 page and everything. But with this is now proof that our router works, our controllers work, and our views work. So next up, we have to actually start creating our database logic, which means that we'll be building out a database core. So this has been quite a long episode. If you're still watching, thank you, and I will see you in the next episode.